It was years ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico, one summer night when I was about 13 or 14. My sister and my best friend were 15 and 16. It's still one of the most terrifying moments of my life. New Mexico summers are brutally hot and, for bored teenage girls, dangerously good at making dumb ideas sound fun. My neighborhood was one of the nicer parts of Albuquerque, but it was bordered by the ghetto. That had never caused trouble before, and we'd been raised to stay alert. My mom didn't mind us wandering the neighborhood late at night. Around 10 or 11 p.m., we decided to walk 5 blocks to the elementary school and run through the sprinklers, something we'd done more than once. We didn't think we were taking any real risk. The school was surrounded by houses, but after hours it was dim, shadowy, and quiet, perfect, we thought, for stripping down so we could sprint through the water without soaking our clothes. Yes, I know, incredibly stupid. While we were fooling around, we noticed a hooded figure standing at the farthest, darkest corner of the schoolyard, watching. We snatched up our clothes, got dressed as fast as we could, and hurried off school property, power walking back toward my house. The route took us from weak streetlight into a stretch that was basically pitch black. As we crossed into that darkness, we looked back. In the last spill of light behind us, we saw the figure break into a full sprint, charging to catch up. We ran hard to another friend's house that was closer than mine. Our friend was out of town, but her sister was home and throwing a party. We burst inside, practically sobbing. I'm sure she loved having a pack of panicked teenage girls crash her night. Once we explained, a few older guys went out to look. They found someone crouched in the bushes, holding a knife. When they confronted him, there was a tense standoff, and then he bolted. They offered to drive us home, but we chose to run the last 5 blocks back to my house. I'll never know what that man would have done if he'd caught us, but it made me think differently about my choices and what can happen when you assume you're safe. I was on a road trip another time during winter break, driving through the New Mexico desert at night with a group of friends. We were headed to New Orleans. It was late, around midnight, and it was lightly snowing, which is weird enough in the desert that the whole landscape felt wrong. Visibility was bad. We'd been laughing and talking, but as soon as we turned onto a remote highway, the mood shifted. It was the kind of road where you can drive forever without seeing a single car, a sign, anything. A few years earlier, we'd watched The Hills Have Eyes, the one about deformed cannibals living out in the New Mexico desert, and it had stuck with us. We were all from Santa Barbara, not used to the desert at all. I can't remember why we left the interstate. Maybe we were trying to bypass an accident and traffic. Either way, we ended up on the back roads. That's when one of us spotted something on the shoulder, a figure kneeling just off the pavement. At first, we thought it was someone who'd crashed or needed help, so we slowed to get a better look, but the scene felt wrong immediately. The person was barely wearing any clothes despite the freezing cold. Their posture was stiff and unnatural, no waving, no movement, not even turning toward us, just kneeling there, facing away. I thought maybe it was shock, so I told my friend to stop. She did, then reversed until we were parallel with him. "Hey, are you okay?" I called. He turned his head and we all froze. The only way I can describe it is that his face looked like it had been torn away and then healed over. No lips, no nose, just crooked teeth and a hollow nasal cavity giving him a skull-like look. But his eyes were the worst part. I only saw them for a second, yet I swear he didn't have eyelids, just dry, bulging spheres staring straight at us. I don't mean to be insensitive, but seeing a severely deformed man kneeling in the desert in the dead of night was pure horror. My friend slammed the gas and we fled. None of us could explain it. The best guess is that he was a burn victim wandering out there, but part of me still wonders if we saw a ghost, someone who died on that highway. Either way, it's one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both women, spent a lot of time exploring the far corners of the land of enchantment, abandoned ghost towns, empty roads, the quiet beauty of the desert. In March of 2010, we were driving from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Instead of taking the direct route, we chose a back road. One stretch put us on NM 55, a remote highway cutting through a huge, isolated section of the state. We'd always loved roads like that until that day. The landscape out there is flat and bleak, miles of sand and rock formations between towns. We were heading north when we saw a white pickup ahead of us in our lane. Without warning, the driver swung his truck sideways and stopped across the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away. As we got closer, the unease started to creep in. There was no obvious reason for him to be doing that, and we were the only other vehicle around. We debated turning around just to avoid having to stop. When we were about half a mile out, he moved to the opposite shoulder, but his truck still faced the same direction we were traveling. We tried to calm ourselves. Maybe he was a rancher checking something on his property. As we passed, two things stood out. First, there was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged man who stared at us without looking away. Second, he was talking into a walkie-talkie. Seconds later, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us, never quite tailgating at first, but hovering. He'd close to about 40 feet, then fall back, then surge again. My stomach sank as I realized how alone we were. No traffic, no one knew we'd taken this detour. We checked our phones. No signal, normal for remote New Mexico, but terrifying now. Amy sped up while I flipped through the map, searching for any road that might lead us to somewhere with people. There wasn't one. We had to stay on NM55 to reach the next town, Mountaire, and turning back didn't feel safe either. A few minutes later, another pickup appeared coming toward us, crawling along, maybe 20 mph. It was old and battered, unlike the newer-looking white truck behind us. Amy had pushed our speed to 75, which wasn't like us, and we flew past the old pickup. As we passed, I saw another middle-aged man inside, also speaking into a walkie-talkie. After the white truck passed him, the old truck whipped into a U-turn. Then we watched the man in the white truck speak into his walkie-talkie again. There was no doubt they knew each other and they were coordinating. For the first and only time in my life, I felt genuinely haunted. They stayed behind us. We scanned the road for anything that could be used to disable our vehicle. We were convinced the second truck had been placed there to set some kind of trap. We even talked about driving into the fields, but we were in an SUV on their turf, and the idea of getting stuck off-road and cornered was worse than staying on the pavement. So we stayed on the highway. The white truck closed in until it was practically on our bumper. The second truck tucked in behind him, and the three of us tore down that empty road. The white pickup edged closer and closer, making it obvious he was trying to bump us. I watched, helpless, as he came within inches of our rear bumper. Amy floored it, 80, then 90. The road was flat and empty, but one blown tire, one mistake, and we'd be dead. We refused to slow down. Then the white truck moved into the oncoming lane and began to accelerate. We assumed he was trying to pass and cut in front of us. With the other truck behind, they could box us in and stop us. We stared at the rocky desert on both sides. If we had to go off-road, could we even make it without wrecking? As we crested a small incline, we saw a sign, Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, pointing to a road on the left. At that exact moment, a blue pickup pulled out from that road and onto the highway ahead of us. When we got close enough to see the plates, they read U.S. Park Service. Amy and I looked at each other, then glanced back. Both trucks made U-turns and disappeared the way they'd come. We followed the blue truck to Mountaineer, then continued on to Albuquerque from there. I don't know what those men intended, but it wasn't anything good. Something was deeply wrong out there. As soon as I got home, I called the state police. They said they'd keep an eye on the area. Later, we realized where we'd been. It's near Bella, New Mexico, where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant, but where David Parker Ray kept his secret torture laboratory. We hadn't connected those dots in the moment, and even though David Parker Ray had died around the time this happened, people believe there are others like him. Whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Maybe we wandered into meth lab territory, but since it happened on an actual highway and not some hidden country road, I've never fully bought that explanation. Whatever is happening out there, it isn't good. This happened in 2009. I was 22, leaving California and heading east for a corrections job. I was driving US Route 50 in Nevada, the loneliest highway, around 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday. They don't call it that for nothing. I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least half an hour. I was getting sleepy, but not enough to pull over. Then I saw a car on the shoulder. A woman stood beside it. I slowed and approached carefully, cracking my window just a little. Something about her set me on edge, something I couldn't name then, but I recognize now as my subconscious screaming at me. I asked if she needed me to call a tow truck or AAA. Instead of answering, she lunged for my door handle. I told her I wasn't comfortable letting her in, but I could wait with her until help arrived. Her face twisted into rage. She started tearing into me. "You're a big guy. What am I going to do to you? This is where I see it clearly now." I reluctantly unlocked the door, thinking she had a point. She was maybe 52, around 90 pounds, and I'm over 6 feet with at least 100 pounds on her. She climbed in. I asked who I could call. I had a BlackBerry slide phone. She said she'd rather I just drive her to the next town. That's when panic finally kicked in for real. She wouldn't make eye contact, and she kept digging through her purse. When I suggested calling for help again, she snapped, demanding I take her to the next town now. I was so focused on getting out of the mess I'd created that I missed the man hiding in or around her disabled car. I didn't see him until he was almost at my driver's side door, and I caught movement in the rearview mirror. Fight or flight took over. I threw the car in drive and punched it, pulling away right as they reached for my door. As I sped down the highway, I heard a sharp ping, then my rearview mirror exploded. He was shooting at me. Adrenaline pushed me close to 90. The woman, in whatever drug-induced stupor she was in, realized the plan had failed. She started hitting me, screaming for me to stop and let her out. When I felt I had enough distance, I pulled over and told her to get out of my car. She reached for her oversized purse. I was shaking so badly I could barely think. I leaned over, yanked open the passenger door, and basically shoved her out. I tried to grab the purse in case she was going for a weapon, but she clung to it, though she dumped half its contents onto my passenger seat in the struggle. I peeled out with the door still open, drove until I was far enough away, then slammed it shut and locked everything. I gripped the wheel and drove on autopilot. Later that morning, I pulled into a Denny's, and only then did it hit me how close I'd come to dying. That's when I looked at what she'd left behind: disgusting wadded-up napkins, a few lipstick tubes, and drug paraphernalia. I considered calling the cops, but I'd always wanted to be a cop myself, and I knew getting caught with that stuff could destroy that dream. I didn't think anyone would believe it wasn't mine. I bagged it up and threw it away. Then I noticed a police car at the gas station across from Denny's and finally told the officer what happened. He mostly berated me for stopping and letting her in. He said he'd look into it, but I doubt he did. I never replaced the mirror. I sold the car later, and where I live now, I don't need one. To this day, I hesitate to stop for stranded motorists, especially on desert roads. More often than not, it's a trap. I'm a woman, and this happened more than 25 years ago when I was 16. Back then, I lived with my mom and stepfather about 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada, in a remote area. That night, I'd gone to visit friends, and for the first time, I was allowed to drive myself. I had a great time, movies, hanging out until it was time to head home. My curfew was 10 p.m. with one rule: if I was running late for any reason, I had to find a pay phone and call. So I drove back in my old '71 Chevy pickup with darkness swallowing the road, no streetlights, no houses for most of the way. At the first two stop signs, I spotted an older sedan stopped in the road with hazards flashing. Older cars were common out there, so I didn't think much of it. I pulled in behind and waited. A man in his 30s or 40s walked toward me from the driver's side. I wasn't alarmed yet. In the Mojave, helping stranded people was normal. Run out of water, get lost, wander off, and you can die out there. I rolled down my window. Liquor hit me immediately. I could also see someone sitting in the passenger seat. This was before cell phones were common, and the nearest pay phone was about a 10-minute drive away, so calling the cops on a drunk driver wasn't an option in that moment. He said the car had stalled and asked for help. I asked if it was stick shift. It was. Want to try a push start? I asked. He said yes. I agreed to use my truck to push them gently while they turned the engine over. I knew my truck could handle it, and I didn't feel safe getting out to push the car by hand. The push start worked immediately. They got out, thanked me, and then, like a switch flipping, invited me to hang out and have some fun with them. I declined. They pulled off to the side and I continued on. Then they started following me. It was about 9:50 by then, and I was already running late because I'd stopped to help. I didn't have much buffer time to begin with. Now I had two drunk, creepy older guys tailing me through the dark, with nothing around but our headlights, and I was still at least 10 minutes from a pay phone. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, so I turned down a road where I knew there were a couple turnoffs, either back toward town or looping to a gas station with a pay phone. They followed. My stomach dropped. Shit. I made another turn onto a dead-end road that only led to a few houses. They turned with me, then I tried looping toward the gas station. They stayed on me. At that point, there was no doubt they weren't just heading the same way, they were following me. My heart was pounding. I decided to try something desperate. I pulled over. They stopped behind me. I waited until the driver got out and started walking up to my window. His friend got out too, coming toward my truck from the other side. I let them get close, almost to my tailgate, then I floored it. My tires chewed through rock and dirt, throwing up a cloud of sand, and I rocketed toward the gas station. The place was deserted, but the pay phone still worked. I called home and explained why I was late. I didn't get in trouble, but my stepdad told me to hurry back. Nothing else happened on the rest of the drive home. Looking back, I'm convinced those two drunk idiots were hoping to do whatever they wanted to a 16-year-old girl on her first night driving alone. Some details are fuzzy because this was a long time ago, and yes, at first it sounds like typical teenage drama, but by the end, the way it unfolded still shocks me. I met Jame in middle school and we clicked immediately. We had the same interests and I loved her fiery personality. About a year later, she moved from the East Coast to Las Vegas, Nevada, but we stayed close, talking almost every day after school and during the summer. We shared everything, including secrets we told nobody else. We really knew each other. When high school started, we were just as open about our dating lives, crushes, breakups, the usual. We even joked about dating each other because of how well we got along, but long distance made it unrealistic. Then one day, out of nowhere, Jame mentioned a guy named Ryan. He went to her school. She described him as quiet, shy, calm, and very smart, and told me they were dating. I was surprised. She'd never mentioned him before. When I asked for details, she hesitated, but the basic story was that he'd liked her for a long time and finally asked her out. She said yes. I didn't think much of it. Over time, Ryan got folded into our world. First, he joined our IM chats, what we used when it was too late to call or when our cell batteries died. He didn't talk much, but he seemed fine. He started showing up more often. We sometimes did three-way calls. He was even added as an editor on a Google document where Jame and I wrote collaborative fiction. In the summer of 2009, I saved up money to visit Jame in Las Vegas. It was an amazing trip, still vivid in my mind. At the time, Jame and Ryan were on a break, but I met him anyway once. He seemed normal, tall, about 2 years older than us, dark hair, dark eyes, tan skin. We talked briefly, I barely remember about what. After I came home, my contact with Jame thinned out. I assumed it was school, college prep, programs, life. Calls got rarer. She stopped logging into chat. She went quiet. I was busy too, and I didn't want to pressure her if she was overwhelmed. Then the next spring, she called me late at night. Something had happened, something involving Ryan. She was crying, frantic, apologizing over and over. I couldn't understand her at first. It took nearly an hour to calm her down. Once she finally stopped sobbing, she told me everything from the beginning. A year earlier, Ryan had walked up to her at school and announced they were dating, despite them never really speaking before. He seemed nice, and she assumed it was a shy, awkward attempt at asking her out, so she went with it. She also assumed he'd had a crush on her for a long time because he seemed to know so much about her, even though they didn't share friend groups. But gradually he became controlling, especially about her contact with other people. He insisted on coming along whenever she went out with friends, invited or not. At school, he inserted himself into every conversation. He demanded they meet in the hallway between every class, even if it meant she had to sprint across campus and risk being late. As he tightened his grip, he focused on her relationship with me. He pushed to join our chats. He knew how close we were and that we once talked about dating. He wanted to read what we wrote together. That's why she added him to our Google Doc. And even though she hid how often she and I talked on the phone, he demanded to be added whenever we called. Their break happened because she told him I was coming to visit. He wanted her to tell me not to come despite months of planning. She refused. I met him while I was there by accident, and she was genuinely terrified he might do something to me. After I left, he apologized and tried to make it up to her. The pattern was textbook, cruelty, then love bombing until she took him back. Eventually, he pressured her to cut ties with me again and started lying, claiming I'd said awful things about him or about her. She didn't believe it, but he wore her down. He checked her phone and computer constantly to see if she'd contacted me. Finally, she snapped. She told him she was going to call me, tell me everything, leave him, and move in with family back on the East Coast. He responded by shoving her to the floor and nearly breaking her arm. When she cried, he stormed out, and even then she didn't follow through. The next day he called, apologizing. He claimed he'd allow her to call me on Sunday and promised to make up for everything by taking her hiking at Red Rock Canyon on Saturday. She cautiously agreed and tried to get through the week. Then Friday night around 8:00 p.m. there was a knock at her door. Police. They asked to speak with her and her mom. Inside, they told them they'd received a tip from one of Ryan's friends that Ryan was planning to murder James. They'd gotten a warrant and searched his room and his car. They found a detailed note, a suicide letter describing plans to drive James into the Nevada desert, kill her, then kill himself so they could be together forever. They also found several knives in his car. After the officers left, James called me immediately, dumped everything, and apologized for hiding it. She thought she could handle it alone and didn't want me dragged into it. We stayed on the phone all night until we fell asleep. After that, we started talking regularly again, though sadly we've fallen out of contact since. I still check her Facebook sometimes. She's back on the East Coast now and seems happy. As for Ryan, I believe he was committed to a mental health facility and is still there. I don't know what charges he faced exactly, but he was found mentally unfit for trial. James still has a restraining order against him. It chills me that this happened to someone I loved. I talked to that guy, met him, and he was likely already planning to kill my best friend. I still get shivers thinking about him. The police never told her who tipped them off, but I'm grateful someone did. I can't imagine what would have happened if they hadn't. In the early 90s, when I was 19, my brother and his wife were newlyweds living in Baltimore. I'm from Maryland, but I hadn't spent time in the city yet. I knew some areas were dangerous, but I was just driving straight to my brother's place, so I'd be fine, right? I turned onto the wrong street, MLK Boulevard. Back then, it was a corridor of abandoned gas stations, sketchy bars, and boarded-up houses. A few men walked down the middle of the street, drinking from brown paper bags. I knew immediately I'd made a serious mistake. Instead of panicking and getting even more lost, I pulled into an abandoned gas station that had a bank of pay phones. I parked about 10 feet from them and got out to call my brother. This was around 30 years ago, before cell phones. He sounded impatient at first. He knew the city, I didn't. I was trying to write down directions as he gave them. Then I glanced at my car. The 3 men from the street were now leaning on it, 2 on the passenger side and 1 pressed against my driver's door, arms crossed, staring at me. I started silently crying, thankful I had sunglasses on. My brother heard me sniffle and said, "Why do you sound so upset?" "I'm just giving you directions." I couldn't tell him what was happening, they were close enough to hear. I finished writing down the directions, stuffed the paper into my pocket, and walked back toward the car. The man leaning on my door lifted a hand and wiped a tear off my cheek. Then he said, "Why are you crying, hun? Nothing bad has happened yet." Without thinking, I blurted the first lie that came to me. "I just shot my boyfriend. The cops are." That was all I managed. The 3 men took off sprinting in 3 different directions. If that lie hadn't popped into my head, guardian angels, dumb luck, whatever, you can't convince me something awful wouldn't have happened. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in Maryland, about 15 minutes from the Washington, D.C. border. We didn't have serious crime, mostly petty theft from people leaving their cars unlocked. It was a cold, gray Saturday in October of 1993. I was 8. My brother James was 12. We just left his friend's house after playing street hockey in the driveway, and we needed to be home around 5:30. His friend lived a couple blocks from the elementary school, and across from the school was a big park. A fence ran along that road from the park entrance toward the cul-de-sac where we lived. At a 4-way stop, we noticed a white 1990 Toyota Camry sitting there. We kept walking. I was babbling to James about the Washington Redskins and how we could write in for an autograph from Art Monk. James was unusually quiet. I asked if he was listening. He said, "Keep talking, act normal and don't look back." "Okay." My stomach tightened. "Okay, what's going on?" James had been watching the Camry since we first saw it. Now it was creeping along behind us. We kept a normal pace toward the school. When we got near it, James put a hand across my chest to stop me. He turned and looked back at the driver, maybe checking their reaction, maybe trying to see the plate. When we stopped, the Camry stopped too. This time I got a clear look. The driver was a brunette woman who looked almost drugged. She didn't blink. She didn't look at us either. She just stared straight ahead, rigid and vacant. The passenger was worse, a redhead with long hair, glaring with this angry intensity. Honestly, he looked like an evil Carrot Top. My fear hit hard, breathing shallow, legs going numb. I looked at James. He said quietly, "Keep walking." What made it even stranger was how empty everything was. No cars, no pedestrians. It felt like the whole neighborhood had been erased, just us and them. We went another block. Suddenly, the Camry drifted into the other lane, angling like they were trying to cut us off. James scanned around and said, "On 3, follow me and run as fast as you can." Before I could respond, he counted, 3, 2, 1. We bolted. James shot ahead. I chased after him, struggling to keep up. The Camry accelerated. James made it across the street, but the car nearly hit me, missing by inches. The Camry turned around and came at us again. James sprinted toward the cul-de-sac and I followed, realizing he was aiming for a friend's house on that block. We reached the doorstep and immediately hammered the doorbell and pounded on the door. The Camry rolled up, the red-headed passenger got out, the door flew open. My friend's dad, James, and I rushed inside. Carrot Top jumped back into the Camry and they sped away. My friend's dad ran out after them, shouting and trying to get the license plate. Even though we lived only a block away, we were so shaken we called our dad to come get us. We filed a police report. They said they'd keep an eye out. On Monday, we told the elementary school. At first, they didn't do much. A week later, they finally sent a flyer to parents and police started patrolling more often. That same week, 3 other reports came in, a white Camry following kids and trying to snatch them. I heard one was even worse than ours, kids cutting through backyards while Carrot Top chased them. After that week, things slowly settled. No one was ever arrested. Maybe they moved on and tried somewhere else. All I know is they terrified our neighborhood for a year, and it took a long time before anything felt normal again. I live in the mountains of western Maryland. A few months ago, I went hiking with a friend on an 8-mile loop we'd done many times. We were about 6 miles in when we stopped at the summit to take pictures. At the top, there's a park area with benches, tables, and a parking lot. After snapping a few photos, we sat and chatted. That's when I noticed a man wandering alone in the parking lot, head down like he was studying his shoes. What threw me was his clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, not hiking clothes. We started the last 2-mile stretch, a downhill section toward park headquarters along the mountainside, ending at a second parking lot where our car was. The trail there is narrow with limited visibility. You have to walk single file. I was in front, talking over my shoulder to my friend. When I turned to look at her, I saw the same man behind her following way too closely. A sick feeling hit me instantly. No backpack, no hiking gear, not even boots. And something in his eyes, flat, intent, made my skin crawl. He kept closing the distance. I told my friend I needed to tie my shoe, using it as an excuse so we could step off and let him pass in case he was just moving faster. She understood. We stepped aside. My friend smiled and said hello. He looked startled, then just stared at us, silent. That's when I noticed he was carrying a stick. Without a word, he walked past. We waited for him to get farther ahead, but he immediately slowed down, like he wanted to keep us near. We let him go to the farthest point still visible, and then he turned and looked back up at us. That was enough. We decided we were not going to pass him again. We turned around and headed back up toward the summit area. A few minutes into backtracking, I looked behind us. He'd turned around too. He was coming up the trail after us. I told my friend to pick up the pace. We hurried back to the first parking area where other people were around, then waited and watched, trying to figure out what to do. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. We debated whether he'd continued down the trail and was gone, or whether he was waiting in a secluded spot to ambush us. Then an older couple emerged from the trail. We asked if they'd seen anyone. They said they'd seen a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down, and their description matched him. We explained what had happened, going back and forth about whether we were overreacting. Finally, the husband cut in. We should call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife, and he looked like he was sharpening that stick. The wife tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, but after hearing that, we called a ranger. The couple kindly escorted us back to our car to be sure we got there safely. Later, the rangers followed up. They'd walked the trail, but the man was gone. I still don't know where he disappeared to. I only know I'm glad we listened to our instincts. I've been watching your channel for a while, especially the first-hand accounts of murders from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think every family has a story where they brushed up against something tragic. When you said you were covering Maryland, I thought of my Uncle Roger. This is his story, written from his perspective the way he told it to me. March 29, 1982 is a date I'll never forget. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. Back then, it had a reputation for being quiet and safe, middle-class families commuting to Baltimore about half an hour away. I was 17. I used to ride my bike down a narrow pathway to the village center. That day, I was just going to grab a pop from a shop and maybe burn a few quarters at the arcade. Mom was working late at the hospital, so I had time. About halfway down the path, I saw a woman walking ahead of me, late 20s maybe, light jacket, jeans, hair pulled into a ponytail. Nothing unusual, people walked to the village center all the time, but I remember she was singing to herself. Soft, clear, like she didn't care who heard. It was Ain't No Mountain High Enough, a song that was constantly on the radio. I didn't want to fly past her and startle her, so I slowed down. She must have heard my brakes squeak because she looked back when I stopped. Our eyes met for a second and I felt awkward, teenage unsure. She looked tired, but she smiled warmly. Sorry, I said. It's okay, kid, she said. Let me get out of your way. I nodded like an idiot and she waved me on. I pedaled past her and continued toward the village center. The rest of my day was normal. That little moment wouldn't sound like anything, except I later learned I was one of the last people to see her alive. Her name was Elaine Lee McCadney. After I passed her, at some point she got into a brown Ford LTD. No one could give police a clear description of the driver. Her body was later found on a vacant lot nearby. She'd been raped and murdered. Despite the investigation, the case stayed unsolved for nearly 4 decades. The brutality shook the community, and Columbia's safe town image died with her. In 2021, DNA finally linked Howard Jackson Bradbury Jr. to the crime. It brought some closure, but questions still linger about the exact circumstances, possible accomplices, and why Elaine was targeted. Even now, it's remembered as one of Maryland's most significant unsolved tragedies. Growing up in Maryland, I've had my share of creepy encounters, but this one truly rattled me. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin prickle. It was in September of last year, ironically on Friday the 13th. My boyfriend Zach was visiting. Up until Friday, everything was fine. That day, Zach and I went to the local mall to see the new Beetlejuice movie. I was wearing a black and white dress and flat black slippers. We took a lift there. Nothing seemed strange until we walked inside and I noticed a man staring at us. He looked about 50s or 60s, overweight, gray hair, thick glasses, wearing a blue shirt and shorts. He didn't even pretend to hide the staring. We went to a Chinese restaurant in the mall. Once we sat down, I realized he de-followed us there. At first, I tried to write it off as a random creep, but the longer it went on, the more uncomfortable I got. We killed time at the bookstore next. After we left, I saw him again, still shadowing us. I was about to say something to Zach, but the food hit me hard and I suddenly needed the restroom. Zach waited outside the bathrooms, so I wasn't worried the man would follow me in. Still, something about him felt predatory, like he was waiting for Zach to step away and leave me alone. When I came out, the man was gone and I felt relieved. We went to the movie and I tried to bury the whole thing. By the time the credits rolled, I'd almost forgotten, until we stood up to leave and I saw him sitting a few rows behind us, staring straight at me again. I panicked and rushed out into the lobby to call my mom. I told her what was happening. She told me to find security, only the mall was basically dead and I didn't see any guards. In the small crowd exiting, I lost him. Zach and I took a lift back to my house. On the way home, I noticed a blue car following us and I had a strong feeling I knew who was driving. About 10 minutes from my house, it turned down another street. Since that night, every so often I swear I see the same blue car parked along the street outside my house. Maybe I'm paranoid, but now when I'm out with friends or running errands, I feel watched. I'm sharing this as a warning. Pay attention to your surroundings. Even when you're on a date, even when you're with someone you trust, you never know who's tracking you. There's always a reason to be afraid.